What if the very knowledge you've spent years consuming, like the podcasts, the forums, all those deep dive articles that finally made you feel, awake to how the world actually works?
Right, the stuff that makes you feel like you finally see the Matrix.
Exactly. What if all that knowledge is exactly the thing keeping you completely paralyzed?
It's a huge question.
It really is. What if your profound awareness of society's flaws isn't a weapon at all, but rather this highly sophisticated anesthetic? That is the deeply uncomfortable question we are unpacking today.
And it is definitely uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to dissect a genuinely provocative, ultra-long, and just incisive new ebook titled Cup of Copium, Avoiding Difficult Reality with Salves of Coke by Conrad Riker.
It's a massive text.
Yeah, and we're going to examine the author's intense, uncompromising blueprint. It takes aim directly at a men's rights activist audience, specifically speaking to men within the red-pilled manosphere.
Right, the guys who already agree with the premise that the game is rigged.
Yeah, it's this expansive look at Riker's thesis on how modern institutions were captured historically by feminist and Marxist ideologies and, well, more importantly, how he believes men can reclaim their agency when facing those exact structures.
Because it operates almost like a battlefield manual. I mean, it pulls absolutely no punches about the state of the modern world.
Not at all.
But what makes it so fascinating is that it reserves its absolute harshest, most blistering critiques not for its ideological enemies, but for its own readers.
Yeah, it challenges the very people who bought the book.
Exactly.
Now, before we jump into the deep end here, I do have a quick favor to ask you, the listener. Please like and subscribe to the show. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
It really does.
And also, if you find this topic even half as fascinating as we do, I highly urge you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy this book. It's an absolutely wild read.
Highly recommend it.
And you can follow the author on Substack at Conrad and Riker.
Because it's definitely one of those texts that demands active engagement. Like, you can't just passively skim this one while doing the dishes.
Absolutely not. But, and this is the really crucial disclaimer, I need to look you, the listener, right in the eye for a second here. This deep dive covers highly politically charged content.
Very charged.
We are going to be discussing intense, lightning rod debates regarding gender dynamics, feminism, institutional bias, and the whole manosphere. And I want to make it absolutely, undeniably clear. Neither of us is taking a side here.
Right. No endorsements here.
We are not endorsing and we aren't condemning the viewpoints of the author. Our goal today is strictly to act as impartial guides. We are just objectively reporting and unpacking the fascinating ideas, the historical claims, and the arguments in the source material so that you can understand this perspective fully.
We are just holding up the map so you can see the territory Riker is describing.
That is the perfect way to frame it. So with that established, let's get into the core premise of Cup of Copium, which is just wild to think about.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
Riker is essentially looking at millions of men who believe they are awake. These guys who feel they've taken the proverbial red pill, right? They see the societal rigging, they understand the macroeconomic trends. And he looks at them and basically says, you aren't awake at all.
You're just asleep in a different bed.
Exactly. He says you've simply traded physical, tangible action in the real world for a different kind of sleep. You found this paralyzing anesthetic that makes you feel super smart while your actual life falls apart.
And he calls that anesthetic copium.
Opium, yeah.
Because usually when we look at a man who is failing in life, maybe his bank account is chronically empty or he's dangerously out of shape, socially isolated, the traditional sociological view is that he lacks resources or he just lacks information.
Like he just doesn't know any better.
Right.
Yeah.
Riker flips that entirely on its head. He argues that these specific men have too much information.
Interesting. Too much.
Yeah, they have absorbed this incredibly comprehensive, airtight theory of why the world is rigged against them. But then they weaponize that exact knowledge against themselves to justify why they shouldn't even try to improve their own lives.
Wow, that is such an important distinction. So before we look at what Riker claims is wrong with the world, we have to look at what he claims is wrong with his own readers.
We have to look at the readers first.
Let's explore how he redefines this word, cope. Because the way he uses it is, it's entirely divorced from the way modern therapy uses it.
Oh, completely. In modern therapeutic language, coping mechanisms are generally framed as neutral or even highly positive.
Right, like breathing exercises or journaling.
Exactly. They are tools to manage stress, self-soothe, regulate your nervous system. But Riker fundamentally rejects that framing. He takes us all the way back to the etymological roots of the word.
Where does it come from?
So cope actually derives from the old French word couper, which literally translates to strike or to cut.
To strike.
Historically, to cope with a problem didn't mean you found a way to feel okay about it. It meant you drew a sword and you struck at it. You cut the Gordian knot. You faced the physical challenge with physical force.
But Riker argues that modern men have inverted this ancient definition completely, haven't they?
Totally inverted.
Instead of striking the problem, instead of attacking the debt or the physical weakness or whatever bad relationship they're in, they strike their own pain receptors.
They numb themselves to the reality of the threat.
It's like severing the wire to a fire alarm instead of actually putting out the fire in your kitchen.
That is the exact mechanism he's describing. And this leads us directly into what he maps out as the copium loop.
The copium loop, let's break that down.
He builds this as a very precise, predictable psychological architecture. And it always starts with a pain signal.
Okay, a pain signal.
Yeah, reality presses aggressively against the ego. Maybe it's a harsh romantic rejection or the humiliation of looking at a bank account nearing zero.
Or just being passed over for a promotion at work.
Precisely. A moment where reality forces you to acknowledge your own inadequacy. Now, in a healthy organism, that pain is metabolized into motivation.
You feel bad, so you go fix it.
Right. But in the copium loop, instead of metabolizing the pain and changing his behavior, the man engages in what Riker calls ego-dystonic denial.
Ego-dystonic denial.
The human brain actually registers acute social rejection or status failure using the exact same neural pathways as physical pain.
So the guy is literally in agony.
He is. And to stop the bleeding, to stop the pain, he consumes a comforting story.
And this is where the internet becomes incredibly dangerous, according to the book.
So dangerous.
Because the internet is just ready to hand him a beautifully packaged, highly intellectualized theory about why the system is rigged.
Right, it gives him an out.
Yeah, it tells him, it's not your fault you're broke. The global economy is a fiat Ponzi scheme engineered by central banks. Or, it's not your fault you're lonely. Modern dating apps and hypergamy have completely ruined the social fabric.
Exactly. The comforting story externalizes the locus of control. And that leads to the next phase, which is postponed action.
Postponed action.
Because he feels vindicated by the narrative, right? He doesn't need to go to the gym. He doesn't need to rewrite his resume or learn a new marketable skill. He successfully displaces the blame entirely onto society.
But the final result of the loop is just inevitable repeated failure.
Yes. Because the external world hasn't changed just because he feels better about it in his head.
Right.
So he fails again, which triggers a brand new, even sharper pain signal, which then requires an even larger, more extreme dose of copium to numb it.
This mechanism, the way the brain reacts to this content, is just fascinating. Riker points out that consuming this content actually tricks your neurological hardware.
It really does.
He spends a lot of time talking about a concept called reward prediction error. Can we unpack the mechanics of that?
Yeah, so reward prediction error is a deeply researched neurological mechanism. It's heavily tied to the brain's dopamine system.
And dopamine isn't just about pleasure, right?
Exactly. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical, it's the molecule of motivation and pursuit. So when a man sits down and watches a tightly edited 3-hour podcast on real estate wealth creation,
Or reads a massive, highly technical thread dismantling a geopolitical argument.
his brain receives a massive dopamine spike. The brain's ancient hardware has a very hard time distinguishing between consuming detailed content about achievement and the act of actually achieving something in the physical world.
So let me try to ground this. It's like a guy who decides he wants to get in shape,
Okay.
but instead of doing push-ups, he buys a textbook on advanced kinesiology and cellular nutrition.
Right.
He learns the exact scientifically optimal angle for a bench press. He memorizes the bioavailability of every single protein source on the market. But he never actually sets foot in a gym or lifts a single weight.
Never breaks a sweat.
Yeah. Yet, because he consumed and mastered all this abstract knowledge, his brain rewards him with a sense of superiority over the guys who are actually in the gym, sweating and using suboptimal form.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It perfectly encapsulates Riker's point. The knowledge itself, divorced from execution, becomes the sedative.
The knowledge is the sedative. Wow.
Riker provides this very vivid, almost tragically relatable case study in the text to illustrate this. He describes a specific avatar.
Okay, what's the avatar?
It's a man sitting alone in the blue glow of a computer screen at 2:13 a.m. His physical posture is ruined, shoulders rolled forward, spine curved.
A classic computer hunch.
Yeah. His bank account is hovering near zero. He hasn't seen the inside of a gym or had a meaningful physical exertion in years. But in that highly specific, isolated moment, his brain is flooding with the neurochemistry of a conquering king.
Because he just demolished a stranger's macroeconomic argument in a 600-word Reddit comment.
Exactly. In his mind, he is a warrior standing on a battlefield.
But he's fighting ghosts.
He is. He is skimming the surface of his own life, floating face down, entirely convinced that he is swimming. Riker makes this a brilliant argument that clarity, when it is entirely stripped of physical action, becomes a degenerative disease. It generates this intellectual pride that makes the mixture go down incredibly smooth.
You feel righteous. You feel deeply informed.
You feel like you are one of the few who gets it. But in the physical world, you are effectively paralyzed.
I see the logic, and it's incredibly cynical. But let's turn the lens outward a bit. If these men are sitting around complaining, what exactly is the machinery they are complaining about?
Right, the external factors.
Because Riker doesn't say their complaints are entirely baseless. He actually agrees that the system is structurally broken and hostile to them. So I want to examine Riker's argument regarding the historical capture of our institutions.
This is where the book transitions from a psychological diagnosis to a full institutional critique.
Okay, let's get into it.
Riker argues that modern institutions, whether corporate, legal, or educational, have been systematically captured over the last several decades.
Captured by who?
He posits that this capture was driven by ideologies, specifically feminist and Marxist frameworks. And these frameworks fundamentally view traditional masculinity not as a foundational resource to be utilized, but as a dangerous pathology to be managed, suppressed, and ultimately extracted from.
And he calls this overarching system the exploitation matrix.
The exploitation matrix, yes.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel. But he breaks it down into three very real, very grounded separations. He claims that modern institutions operate primarily by severing men from three things: their bodies, their speech, and their children.
Let's start with the body and speech, specifically looking at the corporate world.
Yeah, Riker has an absolutely scathing critique of modern corporate human resources departments.
Scathing is the right word. He describes the modern corporate office as essentially a psychological sensory deprivation tank.
Engineered specifically to break the male frame.
Exactly. The system, he argues, is designed to reward comfort, compliance, and emotional safety over raw competence and objective truth.
So a man who speaks plainly, who is grounded in reality testing, or exhibits natural physical presence or assertiveness, he is immediately viewed as a threat to the ecosystem.
His natural authority is systematically pathologized.
He gives a really specific example of this double standard in the book. He writes that if a male executive raises his voice in a meeting because a crucial financial projection failed, he is immediately pulled into HR and labeled toxic, unsafe, or aggressive.
Right.
But if a female manager exhibits explicit cruelty or ruthless dominance in the exact same setting, it is celebrated as boss energy or heralded as a triumph of modern management.
And Riker is careful to point out that he doesn't view this as mere hypocrisy or a simple double standard.
It's not just an accident.
No, he argues it is a deliberate structural architecture. It is designed to enforce male supplication, because if you control the boundaries of acceptable speech, you control the boundaries of thought.
That's intense. But I think the most visceral part of this exploitation matrix has to be his view on the family court system.
Oh, the family courts chapter is heavy.
He argues that it operates with a deeply entrenched default maternal bias, acting not as an arbiter of justice, but basically as a massive financial extraction mechanism.
This is the arena where Riker introduces one of the most important concepts in the book, which he calls the utility doctrine.
The utility doctrine.
He asserts that modern institutions, at their core, do not value men as intrinsic human beings. They do not care about male happiness, male fulfillment, or male emotional well-being.
They value men strictly for their utility.
Yes, specifically what they can produce, what they can protect, or what they can pay.
It's like a human resource extraction site. Literally a mine.
Precisely. You mine the coal, you burn it for fuel, and you discard the ash.
Wow.
In the context of family courts, he argues the system fundamentally redefines the concept of fatherhood. It strips away the man's natural authority, his physical presence in the home, and his daily influence over his children.
And it reduces his entire existence and value to a mathematical formula, a monthly financial obligation.
He shares this incredibly detailed, tragic case study in the book to illustrate this.
Yeah, the guy who fought for custody.
There's a father who spent his entire life savings, drained his 401k, just fighting for 50-50 custody of his kids.
And according to the book, this guy did everything right.
Everything. He documented every interaction. He attended every single court hearing. He endured baseless allegations, submitted to multiple expensive psychological evaluations, and jumped through every single hoop the state held up.
And after 2 brutal years, he actually won. He got joint custody on paper.
He did, but you have to look at the collateral damage, the cost of that victory.
Right. His retirement was completely wiped out. His small business suffered massively from all his absences to attend court dates and lawyer meetings.
And his kids were deeply traumatized by watching their parents weaponized against each other for 24 months.
And Riker makes this chilling argument about it. He says the system's true goal wasn't even to deny him custody.
Now, the goal was to bankrupt him into compliance.
The system wanted to make him a highly visible public warning to other men in his community so that the next 10 guys facing divorce would just look at him and quietly accept the default weekend visitation arrangement.
The exhausting, bankrupting process was the punishment. It's the ultimate deterrent.
It's wild to think about it that way.
As Riker phrases it, one publicly bankrupted, exhausted father does the disciplinary work of 1,000 courtroom lectures. The institution protects its default extraction model by making the cost of challenging it financially ruinous.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about how our culture constantly praises men.
Sure.
How does Riker's theory align with the concept of the frontline hero? Because especially during natural disasters or global crises, society constantly elevates and praises male sacrifice.
Right, the essential workers.
We make movies about the blue-collar worker, the firefighter, the deep-sea welder, the logistics guy keeping the supply chain moving. We literally call them heroes. Doesn't that contradict the idea that society hates men?
It's a very fair question, and Riker has a highly cynical but logically consistent answer for it. He argues that the label of hero is, in reality, a psychological pacification program.
A pacification program? How so?
He argues it is cheap, emotional applause used to purchase male silence.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Think about the utility doctrine. When a man is called a hero for working 90 hours a week on an oil rig, or pulling bodies from a burning building, or doing grinding, hazardous labor to feed a family, society is handing him a fundamentally worthless emotional medal.
They give him the title of hero specifically so they don't have to pay the actual invoice for his exploitation.
Exactly, because actual structural support is incredibly expensive. Hazard pay, comprehensive structural support, equal time in the workforce, guaranteed mental health care for trauma that costs billions of dollars.
But applause is free.
Applause is free. The institution masks the brutal extraction of male bodies behind valorous romantic rhetoric.
Riker has a striking line for this, actually. He tells his readers, "You aren't a guest at the banquet of civilization. You are the table it rests on."
That is a heavy metaphor.
It really is. But this brings up a really obvious cultural counter-argument that I want to explore. If the system is so rigged against men, if they are just being extracted for utility, why does our dominant culture constantly talk about male privilege?
Right, it's everywhere.
You can't open a newspaper or go to a university without hearing that society is built by men, for men. How does Riker dismantle this dominant narrative?
He tackles this head-on by dissecting the rhetorical architecture used by activists. He identifies their primary tactic as a classic Mott and Bailey argument.
For anyone who might not have taken debate or logic classes, can we clearly define how a Mott and Bailey fallacy works?
Absolutely. So, a Mott and Bailey is a rhetorical fallacy where an arguer deliberately conflates two distinct positions that share some superficial similarities. One position is very modest, evidence-based, and easy to defend. This is the Mott, named after the defensible stone tower of a medieval castle.
It's a safe place.
Right. The other position is highly controversial, broad, and very hard to defend. This is the Bailey, which represents the open, vulnerable courtyard.
Okay, so how does that apply to the concept of male privilege? What's the controversial Bailey here?
The broadcasted claim, the Bailey, is the assertion that masculinity itself is intrinsically a form of domination, that men as a unified class oppress women as a class, and that institutions like traditional fatherhood are structurally suspect and patriarchal.
And this is the emotionally weaponized claim used to shame average working-class men.
Exactly. But when an average man challenges this, when he points out his own difficult life, his poverty, or his struggles in family court, the activist immediately retreats to the moat.
They retreat to the defensible stone tower.
Right. The moat is the simple, undeniable observation that a tiny, microscopic percentage of men, billionaires, Fortune 500 CEOs, high-level politicians, hold a disproportionate amount of global power.
The activist says, well, look at the composition of Congress. Look at Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Men clearly run the world.
And Riker calls this rhetorical bait and switch the apex fallacy.
The apex fallacy.
Okay.
Meaning judging the condition of the average man by exclusively pointing at the top 0.1% of men.
Exactly. It completely ignores the vast bottom of the pyramid. Riker argues that claiming all men share in the systemic privilege is statistically absurd.
He likens it to diagnosing the financial health of the American working class by exclusively auditing Warren Buffett's personal tax returns.
It's an intentional statistical distortion.
That's a great line. And the specific statistics he brings up to counter this narrative are absolutely brutal.
The workplace numbers, right?
Yeah. He notes that men account for roughly 93% of all workplace fatalities. We were talking about the roofers, the oil rig workers, the deep-sea fishermen, the lumberjacks. Over 70% of the chronically homeless population is male.
And perhaps most devastatingly, men complete suicide at roughly 3.5 times the rate of women.
And he doesn't just list the statistics, does he? He applies what he calls the rights versus symmetry test to this data.
The symmetry test, yes. If you look at the social contract, men have immense crushing duties enforced upon them by society. They must provide, they must protect, they must perform under pressure, and they are expected to absorb liability and danger.
But his argument is that they lack proportional rights in return.
Right. If you have duties, a fair system grants you rights to execute those duties. But Riker points out severe deficits. He argues men lack basic bodily autonomy in the face of military conscription. Only men are required to sign up for the draft under threat of federal penalty.
And he argues they lack reproductive choice after conception.
Yes. And he points to the lack of due process in Title IX tribunals on college campuses.
Just to clarify for anyone who hasn't tracked this specific issue, Title IX was originally passed as a civil rights law to ensure equal opportunity and funding for women in education and sports.
Exactly.
But Riker is arguing that in recent years, it has morphed into a campus judicial system for handling sexual misconduct allegations that often strips male students of basic constitutional rights, like the ability to cross-examine their accuser or access evidence. Correct.
Yes, that is exactly his critique. He argues these tribunals operate outside the standard legal framework, specifically to deny men due process. Riker states that if you systematically extract duties and labor from a specific demographic class without granting them proportional rights and protections, you aren't describing privilege.
You are describing servitude with a better marketing budget.
Servitude with a marketing budget, right.
He also introduces this diagnostic tool that I found fascinating called the gender class swap.
Oh, this is a great thought experiment.
He basically says if you want to test for systemic bias, take any statute, any public policy, or any mainstream media headline and just change the demographic from male to female.
And see what happens.
If the ethical framing suddenly reverses and the situation is treated as a severe humanitarian crisis, it proves a systemic anti-male bias is at play.
It's a very effective stress test for hypocrisy.
For example, if 93% of workplace deaths were women, or if 70% of the unsheltered homeless population were women, there would be national days of mourning. We would have emergency congressional hearings, federal task forces, and massive funding bills.
But because the bodies belong to men, it's just Tuesday.
Right. It's accepted as the normal cost of doing business.
It's just the silent background hum of the civilizational machinery operating as designed.
I see the logic, but I have to push back here. If the author truly believes society is fundamentally structurally hostile to men, doesn't that just invite his readers to become professional victims?
That's the danger, isn't it?
Isn't he just giving them a slightly different, more intellectual flavor of copium? If the deck is stacked, why shouldn't a guy just walk away from the table?
Well, that is the exact psychological trap he is writing this book to prevent. Riker vehemently, aggressively rejects victimhood. In fact, he argues that realizing the system is rigged often leads men into an even more dangerous, more paralyzing psychological trap than ignorance.
And he calls this trap the black pill.
Yes.
Okay, if the black pill is so seductive, and therapy is just another pacifier, as we'll discuss in a minute.
Yeah.
How does a man actually break the loop? Let's unpack the black pill trap, because Riker insists that whining about the unfairness of the board is the ultimate cope.
The black pill is a highly seductive, incredibly fatalistic narrative that has gained a lot of traction online. It's the belief that because the system is mathematically rigged, because family law, HR departments, and modern dating markets are fundamentally captured by hostile forces, all individual effort is pointless.
It's profound nihilism masquerading as unflinching, gritty realism.
Exactly.
It's the guy sitting at his computer saying, well, the game is completely rigged against me, so I'm just going to lay down, play video games, and wait for the collapse.
Precisely. And Riker points out that the black pill is uniquely dangerous because it is partially correct in its diagnosis of the system's flaws.
And uses accurate data.
It uses accurate, depressing data as camouflage for personal cowardice. It consumes a man's attention, his youth, and his potential, while producing absolutely zero adaptive output in the real world.
And this leads to an economic concept he calls the grievance tax.
The grievance tax.
This isn't a financial tax paid to the IRS. This is the staggering price a man pays in his own hours, his dollars, and even his lost testosterone by sacrificing his vital biological energy to the altar of outrage.
It's the thousands of hours spent scrolling through specific subreddits dedicated to documenting female bad behavior, or the days wasted arguing in the comments section of a polarizing political video.
The man genuinely thinks he is getting informed.
He thinks he is participating in a cultural war, but biochemically, he is actually just getting intoxicated on validated grievance.
And the ultimate cost of that tax is his own actual life passing him by, completely unattended and unbuilt.
He also touches on how this fatalism applies to modern relationships, specifically talking about the danger of covert contracts and the cultural push for the soft life.
Covert contracts, yeah. Can you explain that?
Yes. A covert contract is a deeply flawed, unspoken agreement a man makes entirely in his own head. He assumes that if he sacrifices enough, if he suppresses his own boundaries, if he provides endless utility and resources without complaint, he will eventually be repaid by his partner with genuine desire, loyalty, and respect.
Which Riker explicitly calls the junk bonds of relationships.
Because they promise massive emotional returns that almost never materialize.
Right.
And he ties this into the modern soft life movement, heavily promoted on social media platforms like TikTok or Instagram.
Where extreme female leisure, funded entirely by male labor, is celebrated as empowerment and self-care.
Exactly. Men are repeatedly told that their provisioning and financial support is merely the bare minimum entry fee to a relationship.
Right, but if the man demands reciprocal loyalty or respect or traditional support in return for that provisioning, he is immediately labeled as controlling, toxic, or insecure.
It's a lose-lose setup.
Before we move on, I want to clarify something for the listener regarding dating markets, because Riker mentions hypergamy a few times in this section. Can you explain how that fits in here?
Certainly. In evolutionary psychology and sociology, hypergamy refers to the tendency, primarily observed in females across various cultures, to select mates who are of equal or higher socioeconomic status, wealth, or physical stature.
And dating apps change that dynamic.
Riker argues that modern dating apps have hyper-accelerated this biological drive. It creates a winner-take-all market where a very small percentage of top-tier men garner the vast majority of attention, leaving average men effectively invisible.
And this reality often drives average men straight into the black pill because they feel biologically obsolete.
Yes.
This all sounds like a devastating critique of the just world fallacy. This is the deeply ingrained, almost childish belief that if I am just a good guy, the universe will eventually recognize my goodness and reward me with success and a good partner.
Exactly. Riker argues the just world fallacy is theologically illiterate and strategically suicidal. The universe and human institutions do not dispense favorable outcomes based on your moral adherence to being a nice guy. Outcomes in reality are determined by leverage, strategy, power, and competence.
He has a very harsh assessment of modern male kindness, doesn't he?
Very harsh. He says that goodness without teeth isn't virtue, it's meat.
Wow. Goodness without teeth is meat.
Yeah. A man who is kind and compliant simply because he's terrified of conflict isn't actually kind. He's just paying a daily ransom disguised as a character trait.
That is incredibly stark. And he doesn't spare the professional therapy industry from this critique either, does he? He views modern therapy as just another massive copium delivery system.
He is highly critical of it. He argues that modern, culturally compliant therapy takes a man's legitimate reality-based pain, wraps it in endless clinical validation, and hands it back to him as a permanent permission slip for inaction.
According to Riker, it preserves the wound in a sterile, billable environment.
Yes. It focuses entirely on validating how the man feels about his trauma instead of demanding the rigorous, uncomfortable behavioral change that would actually fix the man's material reality.
He creates this perfect, almost satirical avatar for all of this. The keyboard crusader, or the Reddit philosopher.
Oh, this guy.
This is a guy with an IQ high enough to dismantle any complex geopolitical argument. He can explain to you exactly, with historical footnotes, why Western civilization is collapsing. But he hasn't been to a gym in 18 months, his bed is covered in laundry, and he's paying 24% interest on a maxed out credit card.
He fundamentally mistakes his intellectual ability to diagnose the collapse of society for actually doing something about it.
Riker compares him to a dog swimming tirelessly in a tank of water. The dog is paddling furiously, analyzing the water temperature. But the tank has a drain plug owned and operated by someone else.
So if I'm tracking the argument correctly, whenever someone says the system is rigged against men, Riker says the only acceptable sovereign response is 2 words. Yes. And what? That is the threshold where actual sovereignty begins. You acknowledge the reality of the rigging, and then you ask, and what am I going to do about it?
It's a total, uncompromising rejection of the nirvana fallacy.
The idea that just because the game isn't perfectly fair or perfectly meritocratic, you suddenly have a valid excuse to drop out entirely.
You don't get to demand institutional perfection before you take responsibility for cleaning your own room.
Exactly. Riker states clearly, if perfect encyclopedic knowledge of an unjust system produces nothing but endless online commentary about that injustice, then that knowledge has absolutely zero survival value.
It's parasitic. It feeds on the host.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time diagnosing the illness here. If complaining on the internet is out, and relying on endless therapy is out, and expecting the family courts or the justice system to magically become fair is out, what is the actionable antidote?
How does a man actually rebuild his life from the ground up? There has to be a physical mechanism to snap out of this loop.
This is the pivot point of the entire book. This is where Riker moves from diagnosis to brutal prescription. He introduces a concept he calls the 2 cups test.
Right. Cup A and Cup B. Walk me through this.
Cup A holds the narrative that makes you feel better without requiring effort. It's the 6-hour podcast marathon about being an alpha male. It's the manifestation ritual.
Orbiting women on dating apps just to feel seen.
Exactly. It's the political outrage that makes you feel morally superior to your neighbors. Cup A goes down warm and comforting.
But Riker says it's the warmth of a man freezing to death in a blizzard, right at the moment his body has finally surrendered and stopped fighting the cold.
It's terminal comfort. Cup B, on the other hand, holds the objective bitter action. It is 50 push-ups done on the floor without internal negotiation.
It is permanently deleting the dating apps that are destroying your dopamine baseline.
It is opening the terrifying, deeply shameful budget spreadsheet you've been avoiding for months. It is initiating the difficult conversation. Riker demands that men drink exclusively from Cup B.
And he says this process requires going through what he calls the 5 stages of ego death.
Yes. Men have to allow their false, approval-seeking selves to completely collapse. All the clever intellectualized arguments they built to protect their fragile egos from accountability have to be burned to the ground.
And Riker says that what remains after that fire, the irreducible core, is just 3 things: bone, name, and direction.
To structure this new rebuilt life, Riker outlines a protocol he calls the morning rule.
And I want to spend some real time here because it is an intensely rigid, non-negotiable physical and mental schedule. Let's go through this hour by hour because the mechanics of why he demands this are fascinating.
It begins at 5:00 a.m. sharp. The immediate focus is entirely on the physical body. Upon waking, there is immediate hydration with a pinch of sea salt, followed immediately by 45 minutes of heavy compound lifting.
What fitness experts call progressive overload. We are talking squats, deadlifts, overhead presses.
Crucially, there are no screens allowed, no checking emails, no digital dopamine hits.
He actually quotes Hans Selye's research here to justify this, doesn't he?
Yes, he leans heavily into Hans Selye's General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS. For those unfamiliar, Selye was an endocrinologist who developed the foundational model of how biological organisms respond to stress.
Okay, so biological stress.
The theory states that biological systems actually require measured, escalating stress to force adaptation and avoid atrophy.
Right.
Riker takes this physiological truth and applies it philosophically. He argues the physical body is a furnace where intellectual awakening is forged into actual usable strength. Soft, unconditioned tissue cannot build or defend a civilization.
So the logic is, if you don't conquer the lethargy of your own body at dawn, you have absolutely zero chance of conquering your finances or your legal battles by noon.
You've already lost the habit of overcoming resistance.
Exactly. It establishes a baseline of victory over the self. That's 5:0 a.m. And we move to 6:0 a.m. The focus shifts to the mind.
At 6:00 a.m., the mandate is to read 10 pages of foundational classical texts. He specifies authors like Aristotle, Epictetus, historical biographies, or scripture.
Why these specific texts? Why not a modern self-help book about productivity?
Because modern self-help is often just another form of copium. It's highly optimized to make you feel good. Riker wants men reading texts that predate the digital age entirely.
He wants them exposed to the austere, demanding logic of stoicism and classical virtue.
Far removed from what he calls the digital sewage dump of modern emotional validation.
Makes total sense. Then 7:00 a.m., the focus turns to money.
This is the hour of the ledger. You must physically confront your finances daily. You review the budget, acknowledge the debt, set the day's specific income-producing actions, and commit to executing them before noon.
I'm looking at this schedule, and it's incredibly front-loaded. By noon, a man is supposed to have conquered his body, his mind, and his daily revenue strategy. But what happens during the actual workday? How does a man navigate the sensory deprivation tank of corporate HR that we talked about earlier? If he's adopting this highly aggressive, sovereign mindset, does he just go into work and start challenging his boss?
No, and that's a critical point. The midday directive is to fortify your legal posture. But Riker is very clear that this does not mean being openly belligerent.
Okay.
It means operating with extreme, calculated pragmatism. You document all correspondence. You protect your assets. You prepare for the worst-case scenario. You treat the corporate environment not as a family, which HR wants you to believe, but as a tactical theater.
He shares this incredible story of a Google engineer that perfectly illustrates this tactical approach.
Oh, this is one of the most memorable case studies in the book. It's a perfect example of his philosophy of action over complaint.
Tell the story.
This specific software engineer realized that the corporate power structure respects leverage, not morality. He saw clearly that promotions and bonuses were increasingly going to people who checked specific diversity boxes or engaged in office politics, rather than to the engineers writing the most elegant, functional code.
So if this guy's taking the black pill, he would just complain on a forum.
Right.
If he was taking a false emotional stand,
Yeah.
maybe he'd write a fiery manifesto and get himself fired.
But Riker points out that writing a manifesto is the ultimate copium of moral superiority. It feels brave, but it achieves nothing except your own unemployment.
So what did he do?
Instead, this engineer used AI tools to automatically complete all his mandatory corporate compliance and sensitivity training. He smiled and nodded at the diversity workshops. He appeared on paper to be the perfect, completely compliant employee.
Meanwhile,
He quietly used his massive Google salary to fund and build his own highly profitable logistics startup in his off hours. When his startup finally hit profitability, he simply resigned.
he walked out the front door with the combination locked in his head, having extracted maximum utility from the institution.
Exactly. He didn't try to rob the bank by walking in the front door and announcing his intentions to the security guards.
He quietly became the night manager, learned the systems, and built his own bank across the street. That is ruthless, but undeniably effective.
Very effective.
But here's my question about adopting this whole protocol. When a guy actually tries to do this, when he cuts out the digital consumption, deletes the apps, stops arguing on Reddit, and wakes up at 5 a.m., doesn't the book warn that this withdrawal phase is absolutely brutal?
Riker explicitly, repeatedly warns his readers about the withdrawal. When you suddenly stop consuming the endless content that triggers your reward prediction error, you will experience a psychological and neurochemical vacuum that feels exactly like clinical depression.
Wow.
The silence in your life will be deafening. Your nervous system will literally scream at you, begging you to return to the warm, familiar comfort of the outrage cycle and the copium loop.
And that vacuum is the crucible. That's where the true test of willpower happens. That's the moment you decide if you're actually going to drink cup B or if you're going to crawl back to cup A.
Exactly. Riker writes that if your concept of hope does not require you to swallow the bitter medicine of immediate, grueling, unglamorous labor, then it is not actually hope. It is a chemical deception. True hope is forged in the vacuum.
Which brings us to the evening of the morning rule. What happens after the workday?
The evening is dedicated to brotherhood. Riker insists that a man must contact one solid male ally daily. He must accept correction from a peer or mentor a younger man.
He has to close the accountability loop outside of the digital sphere. It must be a real voice or a real face.
And finally, night. The day ends with an examination of conscience. You confess the failures of the day strictly to yourself or to God. You surrender the day's efforts to the judgment of a standard higher than your own base appetites.
It is a literal machine designed for creating discipline.
A literal machine.
But let's connect all of this to the end game. All of this intense individual discipline, the 5 a.m. wake-ups, the heavy deadlifts, the financial audits, the stoic reading, it clearly builds towards something much bigger than just having a nice body or a better bank account.
It has to.
What is the ultimate macro goal for the men who follow this grueling path?
Riker frames the ultimate goal around what he calls the remnant doctrine. And to understand the remnant doctrine, you first have to understand what he is arguing against, which he terms the savior complex.
The savior complex. This is the idea that a man has to personally fix a burning society.
Right. It's the grand delusion that a man must somehow debate, vote, or liberate the entire planet before he is permitted to simply mow his own lawn and secure his own house.
Riker looks at the macro landscape and basically says, society is already in flames, the structural integrity is gone, and the caretakers have long since departed.
The mission is not to grab a bucket of water and try to put out a 5-alarm fire that has already destroyed the foundation of the building.
The mission is to walk away, collect the intact stones that survive the fire, and begin building parallel structures.
He draws this incredibly fascinating, detailed historical parallel to the fall of the Roman Empire to illustrate this point.
Yeah, let's talk about that. It's a very apt, powerful comparison.
When the Roman imperial structure was collapsing under the weight of its own economic decadence, institutional corruption, and overexpansion, the early Christians and the pragmatists didn't waste their time protesting in the Colosseum.
They didn't stand in the Roman forums delivering impassioned, logical speeches about systemic corruption to politicians who didn't care.
They recognized the collapse was inevitable, so they walked away.
He specifically points to the Benedictine monks.
Yes, the Benedictine monks went out into the wilderness, to the fields. They quietly copied the vital manuscripts. They brewed beer. They preserved agricultural science, engineering, and canon law.
They essentially built the civilizational seed banks of the Western world.
Exactly. Riker points out a harsh historical truth. History rewarded the quiet builders. The angry pamphleteers, the guys standing in the ruins shouting about the injustice of it all, were completely forgotten, buried right alongside their pamphlets.
And Riker makes the argument that today's pamphleteers are the guys writing viral threads on Twitter. He is absolutely vicious about the illusion of digital power. He calls this modern delusion the reductio ad Twitterum.
It's a brilliant critique. Reductio ad Twitterum is the false belief that digital reach translates into actual physical power in the real world.
Right.
Riker reminds his readers, 1 million Twitter followers will not show up to harvest your wheat when the global supply chain breaks down. A viral thread that gets 100,000 likes will not represent you or defend your rights in a hostile family court proceeding.
Digital coalition is a ghost. It is not a physical coalition.
So, to bring this metaphor home, instead of being the guy standing in the smoking ruins of a society, arguing brilliantly on his phone about who started the fire, you need to be the guy quietly gathering the stones to build a new wall around your own property.
And to ensure that wall survives you, Riker introduces his final, most profound concept, the generational ledger.
This is the physical instrument of reclamation, and he is very specific. This is not a digital file stored in a cloud server that can be wiped out or corrupted.
It is a physical, heavily bound book. He suggests keeping it in a fireproof metal box.
What actually goes into this ledger, and why is the physical nature of it so important?
The physical nature is important because it represents undeniable material reality. What goes in it are measurable assets and hard truths. It records the physical land deed. It inventories the tool collection.
But more importantly, it records skills mastered, complete with dates and rigorous standards.
It documents the exact day you learned to weld a perfect joint, or the day you proved you could frame a wall plumb and level. It documents boundaries established, debts permanently canceled, and it specifies highly rigid, tested rules of life that are meant to be passed down directly to your sons and grandsons.
Because, as Riker says so bluntly, your grandson isn't going to care about your political opinions.
He isn't going to care about your brilliant rhetorical victories over progressive uncle at Thanksgiving in 2024.
When the future arrives, Your grandson is going to open that heavy book, he's going to walk your physical land, and he's going to see exactly what you actually built with your time on Earth.
Riker summarizes it perfectly. The ledger will either argue for your existence or it will not.
When a man surrenders his physical form, when he gets soft, when he retreats into digital copium and stops building in the real world, he is actively transmitting a signal to the future that his genetic and ideological chain terminates with him.
He is choosing to be the dead end. The generational ledger is bloodless warfare. It is the deliberate retaking of the generational transmission line.
That is incredibly heavy, and it reframes the entire struggle.
So let's wrap this up. We've covered an immense amount of ground today, exploring a deeply challenging worldview. The core journey of this deep dive into Cup of Copium is this. The truth about institutional capture, the reality of biased family courts and hostile corporate HR departments, is indeed a weapon.
But it's only a weapon if you actually put down the digital copium and pick up a physical hammer.
You have to stop confusing the diagnostic X-ray for the actual bloody surgery required to heal.
You have to make a choice to stop numbing the pain of reality with the seductive comfort of a validated grievance. You have to choose to drink from the bitter cup of disciplined physical action.
Once again, if you enjoyed this incredibly deep, expansive exploration of this text, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our show.
Please do.
And you absolutely must check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Cup of Copium by Conrad Riker. Whether you agree with his worldview or find it infuriating, it is a text that will fundamentally challenge everything you think you know about your own daily habits and self-deceptions.
And please don't forget to follow at Conrad Riker at Substack, Twitter, and YouTube to keep up with his ongoing provocative work.
Because it's a text that demands you evaluate not just what you think about the world, but what you actually do with the things you think. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering question to mull over as you go about your day. We talked at the very beginning about X-rays, about diagnoses, and about the institutions that process us.
Right.
In an era where every single major institution acts like a hospital that fundamentally wants to keep you sick because they desperately want your data, they want your outrage, they want your utility, and they demand your compliance. What if the greatest, most devastating act of rebellion is simply becoming incredibly competent, highly leveraged, and completely indifferent to their approval?
What a thought.
What if true power today doesn't mean fighting the system at all, but rather building a life so unshakable, so heavily fortified, and so rooted in physical reality that the system doesn't even try to operate on you, but simply rogues around you? Something to mull over until next time.